The budget, we see a lot that is affecting the elderly, cuts to senior benefits, also a lot that's affecting rural Alaska, the closure of some facilities, cutbacks in VPSOs, troopers. And so some are kind of saying, well, it looks like we're balancing the budget on the backs of elderly and rural Alaska. And we've heard a lot of public testimony about calls for deeper cuts. Is that what right sizing government looks like?
I don't know necessarily that, but I can remember when the average age of an Alaskan was age 26. And when many Alaskans, my dad retired and said, and big hunter, fisher, whatever, but many Alaskans moved to where it was less harsh winters, less expensive. They were on a fixed income and they recognized that they could stretch it somewhere else where the cost of living was cheaper. So am I saying that our elderly should move out of state? No, but I think we have to look at all the options. Alaska is a tough state for older folks to live in, slipping, falling, icy, so on and so forth. So if you're not working on a fixed income, sometimes there are other places that are less expensive to live. So again, we're all going to make choices.
Yeah, we spoke to one man with ARP today who, his family's here, a lifelong Alaskan, and he said this is where he imagined himself growing old and dying, and said he's not sure about that anymore. I know you said that this might not be an ideal place for elderly, but people have family here. Shouldn't they be able to stay?
They should be able to, if they can afford it. Here's our challenge. When you lose 2/3 of your budget, where do you put the money? Do you put it in road plowing? Do you put it in safe roads? Do you put it in police? Do you put it in fire departments? Do you put it in corrections? Do you put it in subsidizing people to stay here because that's what they thought that they wanted to do? So there's our challenge. And like I say, when I talked to this caller last night, looking at the full breadth of it, she said, you guys do have a problem. I get it. It's not as easy as taking out one program and saying, I want it. Because we have to look at it all and what makes a smaller government here in Alaska. We have to do that. So when I go back home and I say to folks, I cut the budget to the extent that the rest that you're going to pay is going to be out of your income tax or out of your wallet, I need to look them square in the eye and be able to say, you guys, I did my best. Now it's our turn to ante up. And is every program that we look at, is that a program that you're willing to pay for? And so that's where we're at right now. And it's going to be a contentious, interesting session. I think we're halfway through. And because people have gotten used to it.
Yeah, well, the elderly, these are people who've been, in the state and worked in the state and contributed to the state for a long time. So I think some people say it's unfair now that we should be sort of forcing them out or taking away their benefits that they depend on to live in the state. Given that they've contributed to the state, we're all going to get old at some point.
I would, and I'm almost there in comparison, and I can say that I didn't work for the state to take care of me. I worked to take care of myself. So that being said, if the state says I can't take care of you this much, but rather this much, that's where I have the choice to make choices. Maybe I'm going to downgrade. I hope my husband's not listening, and move into a smaller house because I love my house, but he talks about it. As we move into a fixed income, we're going to have to do things different. I don't expect the government or specifically the state to pay that difference.
Okay. Another area a lot of people are pointing to is a lot of cuts to rural Alaska, that could impact rural Alaska. And spoken to a couple of rural legislators who say they feel like it's disproportionate. What do you say to that? And can you give some examples of cuts to in your own backyard?
Wow. Okay. Well, I've got a brother with cancer who happens to work for the state of Alaska and has railed at me in town hall meetings that I cut his job. All of Alaska was going to look at downsizing. His job was cut. He had to look for things elsewhere, and it's a struggle. Our families are affected. All of Alaskans will be affected when we constrict government. So as far as the rural areas, we as a state have spent a lot of money in those areas. How we can make those efficiencies, and that's one of the reasons, people kind of tease me about looking at the small schools and, hashtag small schools matter and so on and so forth. But really it's to start a conversation. You guys, we're going to have less money everywhere, and how we make those decisions in how we make schools work, how we make teachers work, how we make teachers' housing work. They too have roads and runways and so on. You know, when we look at even the Marine Highway, we've got places in the rural areas, to some of my colleagues that you may have spoken to, that get 1 or 2 barges a year. So to have that type of transportation in Southeast, much more common, we're going to have a new Alaska, and we definitely as Alaskans have to look at things differently. And I think people are starting to get that feel about how we'll look at things differently, and it'll be a very different Alaska.
Would you say at this point, with what the House has put out, it is proportionate between urban and rural as far as cuts go?
I do think so. I do think so. We made huge cuts in the MAT-SU in a lot of our state jobs. Certainly if you look at the capital budget, I'd say probably the MAT-SU is probably most affected here in the state. And I had the general contractors down here reminding me that most of those folks working on roads and bridges and building, they come from my area. So having little to no capital budget, that's huge. So yeah, I do think it's proportionate. I mean, I think that folks are used to a very different Alaska, and I'll say it again, it's going to be a different one coming up.
Sure. As far as cuts to programs, do you see in places where your own community is going to be impacted?
I see, there's a lot of things that are impacted. When we cut troopers, so we're the fastest growing community in the whole state, and folks are moving from different places to the MAT-SU, and we have cut troopers, we've cut programs in the MAT-SU, and we'll continue because we have to. But I believe that Alaskans are resilient, and I believe that they will pitch in and will be a different Alaska. And I think people will pitch in and do what Alaskans have always done. And there will be some folks that say, to heck with that, we're moving out of state. But I think Alaskans, we were here before. I mean, it takes me back to, we're almost March again, but March 27th, almost 51 years ago was when we had the Great Alaska Earthquake. I was here in the pitch in. Here's what we do when we have emergencies. So, Alaska will pitch in. We'll do what we've got to do.
Great. Those were my questions.
Thanks.
Anything else to add?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay.